Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'll start sharing my screen. You can see it, right? And you can hear me? Okay, great. Thank you everyone for joining. Good morning, afternoon, evening from where you join. And I'm very grateful to my advisor, Professor Victoria Vernon, for her support, as well as the support of the others who have given me comments at different stages of this work. I will be presenting what I have done till now, and I'm very open to comments at this stage. So please give me more suggestions of what I can do to improve this paper even further. So the time use literature has primarily evolved in the context of developed countries. And as such, spousal bargaining and time allocation in nuclear families, the time benefits of marriage have been extensively studied. And even certain papers have looked at proximity to the house of the married woman to parents or parents-in-law, and how that has affected the married woman's labor supply. However, the context in developing countries such as India is a bit different. So here, the multiple generations co-reside under the same roof. And it's not just between gender bargaining, there is also within gender bargaining that takes place. And there are several social norms that govern the daughter-in-law's time allocations, or how an ideal daughter-in-law is supposed to be and what she's supposed to do throughout the day. So this makes India a very interesting region of studying time use allocation. And not just academic literature, one of the sustainable development goals for 2030, so goal 5 is on gender equality and women's empowerment, where target 5.4 recognizes the value of unpaid care and domestic work. And it says the promotion of shared responsibility within the household and family as nationally appropriate. Now, the measure given by the UN is still in terms of between gender, but here in the Indian context, if I just look at nationally appropriate, it's also interesting and very important to look at within gender bargaining. And this allows me to ask two research questions that I primarily focus on in this paper. So first I ask, how do the parents-in-law, particularly the mother-in-law, shape the daughter-in-law's distribution of time between various paid and unpaid activities? And then I ask, can education levels act as bargaining power among the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law and alter the daughter-in-law's time allocation? So what was the main empirical challenge why this paper, or these questions could not be asked very much in the past? One was just the unavailability of time use data that covered the Indian states. And then the first nationally representative time use survey in India became available in 2019. So now there are a lot of people who are interested in these topics, and we are able to work on India as well. And when I say different paid and unpaid activities, I will tell you in greater detail about what they are. But just to give you an idea, I look at paid work, unpaid work-related activities, household production, childcare, and leisure activities. So having shown you the research questions, I'll just give you a preview of the main findings. So in the context of India, I find that the daughter-in-law's participation in paid work increases in the presence of her mother-in-law. The daughter-in-law allocates more time to paid work and less time to household production when the mother-in-law is present. And if I look at the non-nuclear families where the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law, they co-reside, I find that co-residing with a mother-in-law who has completed at least a secondary education actually makes this result stronger. Now, what happens in the presence of a father-in-law? So consistently across all models, I find that father-in-law always lowers the daughter-in-law's work participation, be it the odds of working or even time allocated to paid work, and increases the daughter-in-law's time spent in household production in most of the cases. There are also heterogeneity in results by extent of patriarchy in states. So as I was saying, the norms governing the regions, right? As well as between social group and religious groups. And I will come into each of them in greater detail, but just in case you wanted to see, here is the main preview of the results. Having seen this, I will tell you a bit about how I'm adding to the literature or what has been there in the literature. As I was saying, the presence or geographical proximity to in-laws has been studied on married women's labor supply. So in Japan, this paper has looked into what happens if the daughter-in-law stays with the mother-in-law, and the author found that the daughter-in-law's work participation increases because the mother-in-law shares housework. For then there are studies looking at China and Mexico. So there are different parts. One sees that if the mother-in-law is helping the uh, daughter-in-law with child care responsibilities, which is allowing the daughter-in-law to increase her labor force participation. And specifically to India, there has been some interest to check in terms of co-residence with mother-in-law and daughter-in-law's mobility. This was done using primary survey. And then very recently, as you see, all the papers are like they're working papers, a lot of them in 2023. So they are looking at labor supply, but using a different data set. But they are not able to look at time allocation as such. They are looking at whether the daughter-in-law was just able to participate in work or not. And then there are several measures of bargaining power that have been proposed in the literature, all with certain pros and cons. For example, a branch of literature consider annual earning, current or predicted wages in terms of seeing who has the bargaining power. Now, this is very interesting if in a case where, both genders participate in work, and I actually have this information. But in India, labor market is very skewed and very few women actually take part in paid work. So it's not very useful for the Indian context. Datta Gupta and Stratton in 2010 in their paper, they look at the share of completed education level of couples, and they see how that can be used as a bargaining power between them. In India, just to give you a little more context, so there have been certain theories on what really drives bargaining in developing countries. Okay, so the thesis given by Caldwell in several papers is that the daughter-in-law comes from a different family to the husband's family, and her upbringing and her whole the expectations set around that relation is that the daughter-in-law's work and time allocation enhances the rest of the family members' comfort, right? So her bargaining anyway is very low. And Srivastava and Sengupta, they use relative education level of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law as the bargaining power to say that there is one side, which is the patriarchal thesis. This says that, look, under patriarchy, it doesn't matter what the daughter-in-law has, how much she has studied or how educated she is, because the norms will always tell her to behave in a certain way. The other side, Caldwell's hypothesis, is that a high educated daughter-in-law will be able to bargain for a more equitable time allocation with the daughter-in-law. So having seen or heard about this multiple theories governing the daughter-in-law's time, I next speak about what is the data that I use in this paper to answer this question. So the data that I use is collected by the Government of India, by National Statistics Office between January and December 2019. So data on time use was collected using a 24-hour recall period. So if the surveyor went to a household today, essentially it asked about what the person was doing from 4 a.m. yesterday to 4 a.m. today. So for every 30-minute block, a person could respond what the person was doing. Okay, and information was collected from every household members aged 6 years and above, right? So detailed time use was collected for 30-minute block for a 165 groups of activities, and this follows the standard classification of time use, the ICATIS 2016 framework. And then each group can be further accumulated into what was it, work, was it household production, childcare, leisure, or personal time. Now, in this survey, a person could report up to 3 activities that the person was doing in each time slot. For example, between 7 and 7:30, there is this woman who was cooking. She also spent some time cleaning, and then she spent some time handling her child, right? So a person could respond to 3, I mean, at the max 3 activities that the person was doing. In the primary analysis, I consider all 3. So how it's done is, and it's also the guidance is given in the report as well. So the 30 minutes, it's split equally between the number of activities. And why so? There is considerable literature saying that activities like childcare in a lot of times are reported as secondary activities. So if I just consider primary activities, they might be underreported. But this allows me to consider all the activities that the woman was doing. However, I also do robustness checks in which I relax this assumption and I just look at the primary activity reported by the respondent, and the results do not really change. I mean, the significance or the directions, they stay in the same line. But for now, I'm going to show you the results where I consider all the activities in a time slot. All right. How are the individuals identified? So for every household, with relation to the household head, everyone can be identified. So the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law were identified based on the relation with the household head. And the age group that I considered again, so for the daughter-in-law, she had to be aged between 20 and 40 years. The mother-in-law were present, were aged between 40 and 70 years. The age range is considered keeping in mind that they are of economically active age and they are neither too young nor too old to undertake different activities. But I have also changed the age ranges just to see that the results that I receive are not an artifact of the age, and it's not so. But here I'm going to present results for these. For co-resident in-laws, the sample comprises of families where there is one daughter-in-law and one mother-in-law. So there can be families where there are multiple daughter-in-laws co-reside with the mother-in-law. Then the bargaining happens at multiple levels. So I restrict the families to one and one. As a robustness, I check what happens if the multiple daughter-in-laws co-reside with the mother-in-law. Right? I also include families which had complete information on time allocation. I do not consider families residing in the state of Meghalaya in India. The reason being that Meghalaya is a state in the northeast of India, but the norms are very different. And here, essentially, the husband goes to the wife's family to stay. So since the norms are very different and this kind of modeling would not work, so Meghalaya is excluded. And since I'll be using the education levels as the measure of power, I only consider daughter-in-laws whose education is complete. All right. The outcome variables that I consider are work, which includes all paid activities classified under goods or services produced for market, unpaid work-related activities. So this is not household production, okay? Unpaid work-related activities include unpaid activities which are classified under goods or services or for own final use, okay? Household production, on the other case, it includes all the unpaid domestic and caregiving services that the person engages in, does not include childcare. In the literature, it shows that childcare behaves very different from household production and leisure. So childcare, which is considered only for families with children, include all the activities under childcare, for example, cleaning, feeding the child, passively minding the child, going, accompanying the child to places. Leisure comprises of socializing, community participation, religious practices, and so on. So you see, these activities do not really add up to 40 minutes, like 24 hours. I've not included personal time and a few others which are left, but primarily I will be focusing on work, household production, childcare, and leisure. Just to give you an idea, and I would like to point out that the scale of these graphs are different, okay? So keeping that in mind, I plot this by if mother-in-law is not present or the mother-in-law is present, there is some difference and significant between daughter-in-law's participation in paid work. For household production, I see there is a 10-minute significant reduction in our time spent on household production. For childcare, the daughter-in-law's time increases significantly in the presence of the mother-in-law. For leisure as well, presence of a mother-in-law increases our leisure time. Now, I just want to break down leisure also to show that how different leisure is in terms of India. The reason being, a lot of papers that I was seeing, in the US, watching TV forms a major part of leisure. Also, just a point, I'm not looking at the chat right now, so I will be addressing the questions towards the end for the ones in chat. So for leisure in India, talking and relaxing form a considerable part. The brown part here is essentially praying, okay? And you see over the daughter-in-law's education levels, the time spent by the daughter-in-law in prayers, which is really religious prayers, increases. And praying in India is considered as a status good. So a good daughter-in-law is supposed to spend some time doing following religious practices. Kind of enhances the family status. And you see that even with leisure, even with an increase in education, the time spent by the daughter-in-law increases in leisure. And if I just show you by the education level of the daughter-in-law now. So the one on the top is the time spent on household production. You see that with an increase in the daughter-in-law's education, the time spent by the daughter-in-law on household production falls. If you look at the red line in the bottom, it is the unpaid work-related activities. So that falls as well. If you see paid work, there is kind of an U shape. So initially at the level illiterate education, like no education, it's high, then it falls considerably, and then it increases a bit, right? And for childcare, it increases with an increase in the daughter-in-law's education level. Now, the kind of work that the daughter-in-law engages in at these two extremes, illiterate and tertiary, are very different. And it's also in terms of what is available, what is acceptable. For example, for illiterate daughter-in-laws, a lot of time is spent in primary activities. And in tertiary, 85% spend their time in services, in which there are retail services that she takes part in, teaches in works in the education sector, which are considered as suitable jobs for the daughters-in-law. This image, so figure 7 shows the time spent by the daughter-in-law by her education level in household production and leisure. And the one on the right shows the time spent by the mother-in-law by the daughter-in-law's education level. Okay. If I focus on the graph on the left, that is figure 7, on the top is the household production. And I see that the time spent by the daughter-in-law in household production significantly falls with her education, and time spent on leisure increases. Interestingly, in figure 8, I find that the mother-in-law's time spent on household production increases if she co-resides with the daughter-in-law who is highly educated. So this shows a possible bargaining that's going on, where the daughter-in-law and the co-residing with mother-in-law can change some time in household production. The other thing that I would like to bring now is the kind of norms that are governing the states, right? So in Europe, Gruber and colleagues designed the India Index of Patriarchy, all right? And this was done to measure varying degree of sex and age-related patriarchal bias in the society. Okay, and there are several dimensions and components under each, which completely cumulatively builds the index. Using the index created in Europe, Singh and colleagues extended that to India, contextualized and checked for validity of the index. And they designed the India Patriarchy Index using demography and health survey data till a few years back. What I do is, in addition to the time use data, I replicate this paper by Singh et al., create their index, and extend the index further to 2019 to match with my survey data. And if I briefly take you through the 5 domains under the index, there are male domination, generational domination. So if I just go here, for example, there are different variables under each domain with negative link and positive link. So female head is in the population, what is the percentage where the woman is a household head, which is negatively linked to patriarchy. Whereas among young brides, among the married women, how many are young brides? that is positively related to patriarchy, and so on and so forth. So this was created for every state, and finally the scores were aggregated to create an index. And if I show you how the states really look like in India, so this is what the ranks are, and this is what the states look like. So as I said, Meghalaya is a matrilineal society, and the norms are very different. So I will not be using Meghalaya in the study, but I just wanted to show you it has the lowest patriarchy score. And on the other range is Rajasthan, which is the most patriarchal state in India, closely followed by Haryana, which is in the north and west of India. So this is a range from like northeast coming to north and west. So there is a huge geographical variation, and to some extent, I will be using this in my results today. The social norms also vary by individual social group and religious identities. Okay. For example, women are discouraged from working outside when the husband's income is considered sufficient, and this is seen both in rural and urban India, but more in urban India. Then caste hierarchies play a high role. Daughter-in-laws from general social group, they face greater restrictions in terms of their behavior. Whereas daughter-in-laws from scheduled tribe or scheduled caste families, they might need to work, right? So their restrictions are a little less. There are differences by religion as well. I'll tell you how so. So Hindu daughters-in-law, they usually do not know their future in-laws a priori. And in a lot of Muslim families, however, marrying between cousins is common. So essentially, the woman have an idea of who their in-laws are going to be. So the bargaining power can shift based on this. And Ms. Don Caldwell's paper again, he was saying, like the paper actually said that Hindu women, they already come with a lot of expectation of appropriate behavior when they go into this new family, where Muslim women have an idea of how it can be. However, work restrictions are higher for Muslim women in India. So we'll have to see how the norms that are playing out can affect their bargaining power and time allocations. And if I look at by the extent of patriarchy, daughter-in-laws actually can enjoy lesser restrictions in lower patriarchal regions. It is also possible that more number of suitable jobs are available for them, right? So if I just show you a quick peek of the summary statistics here. So this table is by absence or presence of mother-in-law and how the time varies. So you see in these families, right? So Hindu families, the women spend, let's say 68 minutes when the mother-in-law, it's not like she's not there. But the Muslim families, it's directly coming to half. If I come to the last set, like the last 3 rows, in low patriarchal regions, women spend considerably high time working, whereas it's pretty low in the high patriarchal region. I will come to these again, but just wanted to give you an idea. And with this, I move on to the methods that I use here. So the methods that I use here...
Leena, I apologize. 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So I use a logit model to check if the woman's daughter-in-law's work participation is affected by the mother-in-law's presence. And I use Tobit models to see how the time is really affected. And for controls, I use the age and education of the daughter-in-law. For co-resident families, I check the age difference of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, social groups, number of children, day of the week, and state fixed effects. What I find is the following. So when I check for work, which is by the usual principal activity status, paid work, also paid work outside the house and unpaid work-related activities, I find that the mother-in-law's presence increases the daughter-in-law's work, like paid work, and the father-in-law's presence or presence of other adult males, it significantly lowers the daughter-in-law's work participation. Infants reduce the mother's work participation, but older children increase it. And there are differences by socio-religious groups and sector of residence. And these results that I was saying, I considered for the whole sample. If I restrict them to just normal weekdays, it's not really different from India for our results. And if I look at the time spent, okay, So the estimated average marginal effects is what I estimate this to check for the time. The daughter-in-law spends 7 more minutes on paid work when the mother-in-law is present and 9 fewer minutes on household production. Whereas in the presence of father-in-law, the work decreases by 12 minutes and our household production increases by 7 minutes. Whereas for childcare and leisure, it really didn't affect if the mother-in-law or the father-in-law were present. Okay. If I look at the education now and see, so for the daughter's own education, similar to what the literature has found, so higher educated daughters-in-law, like the women, spend higher time on childcare. And I also find this compared to an illiterate daughter-in-law. A daughter-in-law who has completed college education spends 30 more minutes on childcare. They also spend more time on leisure. But interestingly, if I look at what happens if she co-resides with a mother-in-law who has completed at least secondary education, I find that co-residing with a highly educated mother-in-law, that significantly increases her time spent in paid work, and household production falls considerably, 25 minutes per day, which is like 3 hours per week. So literature always considered that mother-in-law is a hierarchical figure in non-nuclear families who is a demi-patriarch and trying to reinforce all the norms. But it's possible at the higher levels of education, the mother-in-law is actually able to transcend it. Right? I also use different specifications that I'm not going into right now, but I'll be happy to talk about, where I control for work and then check for household production and childcare. And I find if both the women work outside, daughter-in-law's work, time allocated to household production increases a lot. Right? And then I look at results by socio-religious group, and I find quite some heterogeneity. So for Muslim families, or for ST families, the presence or education of mother-in-law doesn't really affect. So with or without, they behave in a certain way. Whereas for general social group or Hindu social group, Hindu religious groups, the presence and education of mother-in-law actually allows the daughter-in-law to go out for and spend more time in paid work. If I classify the states by low, medium, and high patriarchal region, it's interesting to see that while a highly educated, presence of mother-in-law increases the daughter-in-law's work participation, both odds and time spent in paid work, in both low and medium patriarchal states. Whereas in high patriarchal states, the mother-in-law's presence really doesn't matter. Whereas the father-in-law actually increases the daughter-in-law's household work time. So there is a lot of norms that are governing how the daughter-in-law should behave or is able to behave under this. And now you can say that fine, daughter-in-law's time has fallen. Is it because she has become more efficient, or is she able to outsource everything? I do not know if she is able to outsource. It's not there in the data. But I see what is happening to the mother-in-law's own time. Okay, if she co-resides with a highly educated daughter-in-law, and I find that mother-in-law's time spent in household production and childcare significantly increase when she co-resides with a college-educated daughter-in-law. All right. And the same result also is seen if I look at the relative education levels as well. Whereas the father-in-law significantly increases not only the mother-in-law's household production time, also reduces her leisure by half an hour per day. So to conclude the paper, this is the first nationally representative data in India, and I use this to check how the mother-in-law's presence and her education level can affect the daughter-in-law's time allocation. What I find is, if I have to look at policy implications, there are two. One is educating women, it allows the daughter-in-law to bargain, and an educated mother-in-law is easy to be bargained with in terms of transcending the social norms. The adult males and the father-in-law, they're always reducing the daughter-in-law's work participation, increasing both the women's time in household production. So there is a need to alter gender attitudes. I wouldn't say the studies without limitation. Of course, it's a cross-section data. I would have loved if it's a panel data and I could actually observe the mother-in-law's entry and exit in different parts of the daughter-in-law's life, but I can't do that. But also a very interesting question, like I was thinking to myself, fine, daughter-in-law's time increases, but is it really beneficial to her? So there have been literature in India showing daughters, like women who spend more time in paid work, essentially they also face a lot of domestic violence inside the house. Okay. And just in the morning, I saw a paper that's going to come out in 2024. They collected their own time use data, but they found that women who spend higher time in caregiving, they are less happy. Their overall well-being and happiness is much lower, right? I do not have satisfaction levels in this data, but this for future research, it would be very interesting to see if this time allocation is actually beneficial to the daughters-in-law. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Leena. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question because I have to leave soon? If it's okay with you, could I?
Yes, please.
Okay. So what about intercaste marriages? I mean, right now when you talk about, is there any angle to it? Because usually most of the time when you look at it, I mean, this plays quite critically in terms of the family dynamic. I mean, I don't know whether you have any information on that front.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I completely agree, but I do not see where the daughter-in-law comes from. I only see once she's there in that data. But I wish I could do this and see if, like to your question, this is something I was also thinking, if she marries into a higher caste, okay, because there is this matching. So maybe she's working, like her bargaining power is anyway lower, and she's working to kind of catch up with the social expectation, which is like more burden to her. But like unluckily, I can't do it with this data. But thank you for the question.
But so there is no information about the caste there is no control for caste per se?
Yes, in this family. So I know that like once the woman is married to this family, it's the same for all members. Yeah, but I do not know what she was before she joined in.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Leena, can I ask you to stop sharing the screen so we can see everyone? No, it's okay. Yes, other questions, please.
There are two in the chat.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. First question is, if you control for husband's education level, not in this paper, okay? Because here, like I already have the daughters-in-law and the mothers-in-law's education levels. But in a different one, I'm looking at spousal bargaining. And there I'm looking at the woman and the husband's education and how that's working out. But thank you for this comment. I'll note it down and I'll see if I can do something about it. And
thank you.
One is,
can you answer the second one, please?
Yes. Are the results for low patriarchal states driven by the fact that daughter-in-law choose to live with mother-in-law? Only they're helpful for them and allow daughter-in-law to work. This is a fantastic question. And this, I would have really loved to do it in the sense if you are talking about selection, like selecting into a non-nuclear family to begin with, there can be some selection there, and daughter-in-law might be able to say that I will not marry into a family where the mother-in-law is already present. It is possible. However, in a lot of recent literature as well, there is evidence that the daughters-in-law don't really get a lot of say when she goes to the marriage market. It's kind of pre-decided by the elders of the family in terms of how they would want that marriage to take place. But thank you for your question.
Thank you. Other questions? Please just turn on the mic and ask.
I wonder if you had information about health conditions and household size, because those two are crucial for the younger generation in the family, minutes of work or what you call it.
Yes, so I have looked at household size in the sense, so once I just controlled for the household size without including the classification by age, gender, or other adults, male and female. And so I did that and checked as well. As for the health, an interesting question that I was asked before is, what if the mother-in-law is sick? Okay, and then the whole thing changes considerably. So in the sample that I have, they spend less than 2 minutes on medical care. But you can always say that those 2 minutes are very crucial. But I do not know, what they were doing in those 2 minutes. Like if it was just some normal medication, if it was insulin or what exactly. But overall, the time spent by the mothers-in-law in this sample was not very high.
I was referring to special needs. That is not just temporary, but more permanently?
I sadly do not have information on if they
Okay.
needed special
Yeah.
care, but
Because that
would be
would
very interesting.
generate like outliers in the sample. Thanks. Thanks.
But so I do not have special needs, but I do have information on other people assisting for health. So I do not know if, I mean, I use that to check like how much time is spent by them to help others or getting helped by others. So maybe that could be a proxy. I mean, just a proxy because I do not have the straight answer to it.
Other than that, it's difficult to believe that a daughter-in-law at lower age has any bargaining power when it comes to hierarchy and age. It's difficult to place it there.
Without special needs?
No, I mean in a society that's hierarchy is very important and age is also important. It's very difficult to say daughter-in-law has a bargaining power.
Actually, that's why I was working on this paper. I also wanted to find out that in 2019, what's going on, because I would believe maybe 20 years back, the results would be very different. But now over in the last 2 decades in India, the education level has increased a lot and the number of children have fallen. So maybe things are becoming a bit different. So that's why I was also curious, but thanks for this. Yes.
Thanks.
Elena?
Yeah, I was wondering, so in India, one of the issues is that despite, growth, as you said at the beginning, a lot of women don't work, right? So I wonder if you can do, maybe this is like beyond the scope of this paper, but I wonder if you're going to use this for policy, maybe you can do like and I don't know if this is possible or not, but like a back of the envelope calculation, how much does actually having a mother-in-law increase the labor supply? Like how much does it matter relative to, I don't know, whatever policies they're using in India to, make women work?
Thank you. I'll take a note of this. I'll see if I can do something.
Please, Klaus.
A more principal question of interest to me. How does your data deal with joint production in the household, watching TV and feeding kids at the same time? Is this measured separately or somehow?
Right. So let's say if at the same time they reported watching TV and feeding a child. So there are these 2 activities in that time slot, let's say. So it will be 15 minutes and 15 minutes. And in watching TV, so leisure will have 15 minutes and childcare will have 15 minutes.
Okay.
Leena, can I ask about the sleep time? Because like you did not consider this, but this is kind of one of the important in this gender balance around like anything that is left for the woman to recover and so on.
Okay, I can do that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Can I please ask, if you don't mind, I would like to take a screenshot of, if you don't mind, to be on the photo, and so we can post about this. Could you please turn on the video so I can take a snapshot? Please smile. Thank you very much. Thank you. I will turn off the recording now. Odma, we don't have, we only have Leena here with regards to...
No, Rubina as well.
Sorry?